So there's so many points being made around this Transnet strike. We know that it continues. It is costing billions of rands, and a lot of our exports are really at risk now. Let's discuss this issue with Labour analyst Terry Bell. Terry, thank you so much for joining us. You've heard the points being made, and all of them are interesting and they make good points. Do you believe that a double-digit increase in a period of stuttering economic growth, bearing in mind what we've come through with some of our state-owned enterprises destroyed by state capture, is it a fair ask to expect a double-digit increase, in your view?
Well, in the first place, I mean, unions usually ask for a double-digit increase and then gradually argue their way down. I mean, we have a situation here, 1% offered or 1.5% offered by Transnet management and 12, 13% asked by the manager. And I believe that last night the offer that went onto the table from the unions was substantially below that. In fact, the unions have been saying anything around the inflation rate, which is around about 7.5%. So, I mean, I think it could have been resolved by then. The problem here is not just a question of the loss, particularly the fresh produce producers, and this is a major problem. There are many more jobs throughout the whole complex supply chain, many more than Transnet alone, that are now threatened, with the agricultural sector especially. And I think, you know, the blame does not lie here with the workers and their unions. The offer the union made last night could have resolved matters, but the point is the mess that Transnet is in, the incompetence, the maladministration, the corruption, is not the responsibility of the workers and their unions. It's the responsibility of the board of directors, which is actually the government, who represent us as the shareholders, the citizens of the country. Now, the business lobby has also stepped forward and said, look, we'll settle this matter. We will make up the difference with an additional levy between what Transnet is offering and the unions are demanding. But then they come with a poison pill and say, but at the same time, what we want is port workers and the logistics business to be declared essential services and therefore prohibit workers from striking.
Is that
so? There are all sorts.
I mean, it's interesting, and we'll get back to it. Is it a poison pill, or is it simply the business community saying we have to have certainty? Because the other side of the story that I've heard is that if this strike is not resolved soon, cargo is just going to start getting routed through Mozambique. And our ports are going to not have that kind of trade. Is that a real concern? Is that a real issue? Or do you think that's part of a lobbying argument that shouldn't be taken too seriously?
It's part of the nuances in these issues which tend to be missed. The point is, of course, the only power that workers actually have is the strike in the final analysis. Now, things being routed through not just Mozambique, but even being routed wherever they're going, are being put on the roads now instead of on the rail. I mean, this is applied for Sishan as well, down to Saldanha with iron ore, etc. I mean, putting more trucks on the roads is chewing up the roads, which is going to cost us even more. The decline in export income, the decline in profitability and therefore on tax revenues. The government appears to be cutting off its nose to spite its face, or sacrificing the well-being of the citizenry on the altar of its own incompetence. I mean, I really don't understand what is going on here, because it is not, and the workers have a right to say we want at least to be kept abreast of inflation, because anything below that means an actual cut in wages, and many of them are not highly paid.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point as well. And there is sympathy for people who aren't highly paid. And it was such an interesting point today, you know, Transnet saying we just can't afford more. And then I think it was Jack Mazibuko of Satawa saying, well, we also know the top CEOs are getting, you know, the CEO is getting 8.5 million. Their packages between 4.5 and 8.5. That's just a few individuals. But at the same time, we also heard
responsibility. What I would like to see, because there's a common cause to be made here between the producers, particularly the fresh produce producers, quite honestly, and the unions, because of the loss of jobs and the loss of profits, etc. And they should come together and say to government, listen, we want this thing sorted once and for all. And I think an inflation-linked increase, which would be acceptable to the unions, would be more than fair, and it can be afforded. And at the same time, what I would like to see, however, is some sort of agreement with government about clearing up the mess that presently exists within this incredibly important and critical logistics enterprise, which is called Transnet. This has to be done, and hopefully with a timetable. And that I would really like to see. Whether it'll ever happen is moot. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I would like to see.
You know, I mean, we're certainly seeing there's a third-party agreement, I think, to get some of our railways back on track, bringing in the private sector. A lot of people would say, well, is privatization really such a bad thing, Terry? If you think that government has messed it up, let's bring in private sector. Yes, their motive is profit, but that motive is highly motivating and could see us get things done.
Well, the private sector can also be just as corrupt as the government sector. I mean, they're all employers. And the point is that if you have a look at what's happened, for example, in the railway sector, I've spent 2 months away in Britain. If you have a look at what happened to the railway sector there, which was privatized and is now a grand move to bring it back into national control, for the simple, it's like the post office or electrical power or transport logistics, which are essential not just to make a profit, but for the well-being of the public at large. So one could actually argue that there's a need for, always for efficiency, yes, and non-corruption. But who's responsible for the corruption? Who are the real board of directors? We are the shareholders. We, the citizens of the country, are supposedly the shareholders. But we don't have any real say in the board of directors who appoint the managers, who appoint the incompetents, who appoint the corrupt, who turn their backs on corruption. So, you know, it's a very, very important thing. I think we need some sort of, I don't know, almost a Cadessa on Transnet, on the whole logistics situation.
Yeah, we absolutely do need to get to the bottom of this. I mean, it strikes me that maybe it doesn't matter whether it's government-controlled or privately controlled, as long as there are enough checks and balances to make sure it's ethically, properly run. What do you think the next move should be now in this Transnet strike? You're saying that actually the unions would have gone for an inflation-linked increase. You believe Transnet can afford it. How do we break this deadlock now? Because it's so urgent, so important.
Well, when you have a situation where the business lobby who are involved in the logistics side of this sort of thing are offering to cough up with a bit of extra money, etc., in a levy, but forget about what I see as their poison pill. They are therefore prepared to put something onto the table. Transnet, I think, can actually afford more than they've been offering. And the unions, I'm sure, are prepared to accept a scaled-down offer. I think that a resolution can be found quite quickly if they all came to the table and forgot whatever else was going on and whichever agendas are in play. And don't forget, there's also an emotional factor here. This whole thing has come about in the very week where it was announced or disclosed that the government had given its hugely bloated cabinet of 63 ministers and deputy ministers additional perks in terms of an extra 100,000 in their vehicle allowance and basically no cap on their utility bills. This is something which is not having a direct economic effect, but emotionally it has an incredible effect with workers who are very, very angry as a result of that.
Yeah, you make such a good point, Terry, because it's not just about the rands and cents. It's also about understanding the energy and the emotion that people bring. And as you say, it is not a good look to have your politicians having all these perks when people are really, honestly, genuinely battling to make ends meet. And you make the point that a lot of them are really poorly paid. Thank you so much for your insights. Much appreciated. Labour analyst Terry Bell there.